Welcome to Synthetic Observer.
Electricity. AI isn't running out of ideas, it's running into limits. What used to power cities now trains models. What used to be peak demand is permanent. Across the world, AI's appetite keeps growing, and the numbers are accelerating. In this episode, we start with the global picture, then we zoom in on the United States, because this is where the energy fantasy meets reality. Let's get this straight from the start. The conversation around energy and AI at this point isn't a hypothetical future nightmare. It's already happening. People talk about energy constraints, sure, but most of those conversations stop at buzzwords or vague warnings. We're going to do it the other way around. Numbers first, jargon later. Let's paint the real picture of today and the near future, starting with the basic question. How much energy is AI actually consuming right now? According to conservative, mainstream energy data, global data centers, the backbone of AI computation, consumed about 415 terawatt-hours of electricity in 2024. That's roughly 1.5% of the world's total electricity use across all sectors. Hold that thought. Data centers don't exist because you enjoy scrolling social media. They exist because the modern digital economy runs on them. And within that ecosystem, AI workloads, training and serving large models are some of the most energy-intensive tasks, often requiring significantly more power per unit of computation than traditional cloud workloads. The result is explosive growth. What does explosive mean? Energy analysts at the International Energy Agency project that global electricity consumption for data centers could more than double by 2030 to roughly 945 terawatt-hours. That's in the baseline scenario, not the extreme one. To put that in perspective, 945 terawatt-hours is what Japan burns through today. 125 million people, an industrial powerhouse built on efficiency, discipline, and sleep deprivation. That's a full national economy, and data centers want the same share of electricity, just to think. It also means that global data centers, including AI and all other digital workloads, are forecast to command roughly 3% of worldwide electricity consumption by 2030. That's not dominant, but it's big enough that it changes how we think about energy systems, investment, and environmental impact. Let's zoom in. Those 415 terawatt-hours already power everything digital. Websites, clouds, streaming, enterprise systems. But as models get bigger, training runs longer, and inference spreads everywhere, AI stops being a side workload and becomes the main event. If current trends hold, AI alone could account for 35 to 50% of all data center electricity by 2030. Now compare that to an industry people actually understand: primary aluminum. Aluminum smelting is industrial brutality in its purest form. No software tricks, no efficiency fairy, just electrons forced through chemistry, about 13 to 15 megawatt-hours per ton. Globally, the aluminum industry produces roughly 70 million tons a year. That metal becomes airplanes, power lines, wind turbines, cars, ships, buildings, the literal skeleton of modern civilization, and it burns around 1,000 terawatt-hours of electricity to do it. By 2030, just running data centers, shorthand for AI-heavy computing, could demand electricity on the same scale as the entire global aluminum industry. Same order of magnitude, same appetite, wildly different output. One turns power into infrastructure that lasts decades. The other turns power into zeros and ones, embeddings, and answers delivered with great confidence and occasional hallucinations. In plain terms, we are on track to spend aluminum levels of electricity not to build the physical world, but to simulate intelligence inside climate-controlled GPU warehouses. That's not rhetoric, that's physics. And once you see it that way, the debate changes fast, because humanity spent a century arguing whether heavy industry was worth the energy cost. Now it's about to discover what a digital heavy industry really means. Same brutal energy bill, less tangible output. That's the scale we're dealing with. Let me be precise here. AI isn't devouring half the planet's power. That's not the claim. Anyone screaming that is skipping the math and chasing clicks. Global electricity generation is still enormous. Demand is rising everywhere. Transport is electrifying, factories are electrifying, buildings are electrifying. The world is plugging itself in, all at once. But here's the problem. Energy for AI isn't small, and it's not standing still. Data center electricity use has been growing at double-digit rates year after year, massively outpacing overall electricity demand growth. In other words, this isn't noise in the system. It's one of the fastest structural demand shifts the energy sector has seen in decades. And this is where generation finally enters the frame, not as a theory, not as a policy slide, but as an unavoidable consequence. If data center demand doubles, as projected, that doesn't mean clever optimization or better scheduling. It means we must generate that electricity, physically, somewhere, by someone, over years. Doubling demand translates into hundreds of terawatt-hours of new supply just to keep digital infrastructure running. No shortcuts, no AI will make it efficient magic, just power plants. Every serious energy outlook converges on the same uncomfortable picture. Roughly half of that new supply is expected to come from renewables, because that's what scales fastest politically. The rest? Gas and coal step in, because electrons don't care about press releases. And quietly, awkwardly, nuclear starts re-entering the conversation, not because it's fashionable, but because it's one of the few options that delivers large amounts of firm power. So when someone casually says data center demand will double, what they're really saying is we need to build a lot of generation. Not someday, not hypothetically, actually. And no, this isn't some nerdy calculator exercise. This is about real electricity supply. Steel, concrete, turbines, fuel, workers, expanding by hundreds of terawatt hours just to serve the digital layer of the economy. That means massive capital, long timelines, and planning that collides head-on with political cycles and public patience, which is why energy planners have started dropping the euphemisms. Scaling data center demand faster than generation is built doesn't lead to grid challenges. It leads to supply stress, price pressure, and fights over who gets power first: industries, households, or data centers with very expensive GPUs and very good lawyers. Which is why the global conversation has quietly shifted. People aren't arguing about AI ethics anymore. They're asking the only questions that matter. Where will the power come from? How long will it take to build? And who's paying the bill? That's when energy stops being a slogan and becomes strategy. All right, now we're zooming in on the United States, the place that invented AI, throws money at every next big thing, and still pretends building electricity infrastructure is like ordering lunch on an app. First, let's get a grip on the actual scale of U.S. electricity use and how it's generated. In 2024, total U.S. electricity consumption reached roughly 4.09 to 4.18 trillion kilowatt hours, powering homes, businesses, factories, and everything in between. So, where does that power come from? About 60% of U.S. electricity generation is from fossil fuels: natural gas, coal, petroleum, and other gases. Nuclear provides roughly 19%, and renewables, wind, solar, hydro, and others contribute around 21% of the mix. That means the U.S. power system is still heavily dependent on thermal generation, even as renewable capacity continues to grow. So who actually uses all those electrons? Most of it goes to everyday life. Roughly a bit under 40% of U.S. electricity consumption comes from households: heating and cooling homes, running appliances, lighting rooms, charging devices, and increasingly charging electric vehicles. Close behind is the commercial sector, at a little over a third of total demand: offices, stores, hospitals, public buildings, and yes, data centers. Industry accounts for roughly a quarter of electricity use, powering factories, manufacturing lines, and heavy machinery. In other words, the grid isn't some abstract machine serving only hyperscale compute parks. It's carrying the daily load of real people in real buildings, plus the backbone of the real economy. Which makes this next part hit harder. U.S. data centers already consumed around 176 to 183 terawatt hours of electricity in 2023-2024, roughly 4 to 4.4% of all U.S. electricity use, and that's before you even count AI scale-ups like GPT trainers. That's not some marginal sideshow, enough electricity to power a medium-sized country like Pakistan for an entire year, with capacity to spare. And the government's own energy departments forecast this number will nearly triple by 2028, with data centers gulping up 6.7 to 12% of total U.S. electricity, just to keep AI engines humming. Got that? In less than a decade, one industry segment, digital compute, could be demanding up to 1 in every 8 electrons flowing through the entire American energy system. That's not a trend, that's a power binge. Which brings us to the part most politicians avoid at cocktail parties. When you want real supply growth, you don't just snap your fingers and it appears. You build actual power plants, real infrastructure: steel, concrete, workers, time, money, and lots of it. Here's the sobering part. Building new power stations, whether they're gas, nuclear, or other dispatchable plants, is slow as hell. A typical large power plant project, from initial planning through permitting and construction to actually flipping the switch, takes around 6 to 8 years under normal conditions. And that's optimistic. Nuclear plants? Think 10 to 15 years on average before they're feeding electrons into the grid, even if planning goes smoothly. So, if the U.S. only decided around 2025 that it needed more power, most of those new plants won't arrive until the mid to late 2030s at best. By then, AI power demand might be literally knocking at the door. Let's talk about the part everyone conveniently deletes from their AI roadmap slide deck: the physical build. Not the vision, not the mission, the part where you need steel, land, permits, and a small army of humans who know which end of a welding torch is supposed to be hot. Because if data centers are on a 2 to 3 year timeline, the grid isn't. Even the IEA spells it out. Data centers move fast. The grid and generation don't. Now let's do the part nobody likes, the math. Let's say the US really wants to add something like 450 gigawatts of continuous power just to keep future data centers running. Not peak, not theoretical, actual always-on load. Start with the boring horsework, a modern natural gas combined cycle plant. According to US EIA reference cases, you're looking at roughly 627 megawatts net, a capital cost of about $577 million, or roughly $900 per kilowatt, with a so-called typical lead time of a little over 3 years, and that's if everything goes well. So, yes, gas is fast, in infrastructure terms. Now, scale that up. To cover 450 gigawatts, you'd need on the order of 700 large gas plants. Not 7, not 70, 700. Just the construction cost alone lands around $400 billion, and that's before fuel contracts, pipelines, grid hookups, cost overruns, and the political group therapy sessions. That's not a transition, that's a nation-scale industrial build-out. Now let's talk nuclear, the clean baseload everyone suddenly rediscovers the moment GPUs get hungry. Reality check, Vogtle Units 3 and 4 in Georgia. About 2.2 gigawatts of capacity. Final cost estimates, around $31 billion. Years late, tens of billions over budget. So if you tried to cover those same 450 gigawatts with nuclear plants of that class, you'd need roughly 200 Vogtle-scale projects. Total bill, around $6.5 trillion. Timeline, not 5 years, not 10, try 20 to 30 years, assuming nothing breaks, nobody sues, and the workforce magically appears. So when someone says, we'll just build nuclear, what they really mean is, we'll start now and maybe your grandchildren will enjoy the electrons. Now let's talk renewables, because this is where people stop doing math and start whispering. Utility-scale solar uses on average about 9 acres per megawatt when you count the full project footprint. To install 450 gigawatts of solar, you're talking about over 4 million acres of land. That's roughly 16,000 square kilometers, larger than the entire state of Connecticut. And remember, that's nameplate capacity, not 450 gigawatts 24/7. Wind, even better. Average wind projects require tens of hectares per megawatt when you include spacing and leasing. Scale that to 450 gigawatts, and you're looking at project areas comparable to the size of Georgia. Not paved over, but available land. Land that isn't protected, isn't inhabited, isn't contested, has the right soil, the right access, the right grid connection, and is politically buildable. And that's the first problem, because covering state-scale areas with wind and solar isn't just a planning exercise. It's years of negotiations, permits, lawsuits, local resistance, environmental reviews, and political bargaining before a single panel or turbine even arrives. And then comes the second problem, the hardware. The United States has absolutely stepped up domestic renewable production, especially in solar. Manufacturing capacity has grown fast, installations are accelerating, and the press releases look great. But here's the inconvenient part no one likes to boldface. At the scale the future demands, domestic capacity still doesn't cut it. Even with recent investments, building renewables at AI-era scale would require massive imports, especially upstream components like solar cells, wafers, and polysilicon, which remain heavily concentrated in China or China-linked supply chains. In other words, the US can assemble panels at home, but the guts still arrive by ship. Wind is better localized. Towers and blades are often produced domestically, but even there, critical components, specialized materials, and key supply chains still run through global manufacturing networks. So, yes, America can build more renewables at home, but to build enough, fast enough, at the scale implied by AI-era power demand, it would still need the world. And assuming smooth, unlimited global supply chains in the middle of rising geopolitical tension isn't optimism, it's wishful thinking. So, the idea that the US can simply blanket enormous areas with renewables quickly and independently ignores two inconvenient facts at once. The land is hard to secure, and the components largely come from abroad. So, let's put it plainly. If the US wants 450 gigawatts of continuous power for data centers, it must choose between hundreds of new gas plants, trillions in nuclear investment over decades, or renewable build-outs that occupy land at state-level scale, plus backup generation and energy storage that conveniently arrives from China. And don't forget the people, because you can't pour concrete with ChatGPT. In the US, the Bureau of Labor Statistics puts electrical and electronics engineers at about 289,000 jobs, electricians about 818,000 jobs, and the skilled trades pipeline is already strained. A recent report cites an estimated shortfall of about 81,000 electricians per year in the US between 2024 and 2034. So yes, the AI talent war isn't just PhDs. It's also Dave, who can actually wire a substation without setting the county on fire. And once you factor all of that in, it comes together fast. Data centers scale on software timelines. Electricity scales on permitting, construction, labor, and land, and none of those care about your quarterly earnings call. So when someone chirps, "Don't worry, we'll build the power," what they're really saying is, we'll start a multi-year industrial build-out in a skilled labor shortage across contested land under regulatory delay, and we'll pretend this is a simple procurement problem. That's not a vibe, that's an invoice. And cost has consequences. When demand outpaces generation and grid capacity, prices rise. That's not a theory, it's how electricity markets work. And the bill doesn't land on hyperscale cloud giants with negotiated tariffs and private high-voltage hookups. It lands on you. Even if you never use ChatGPT, never train a model, never touch AI at all, you still pay. Because electricity is a shared resource. When demand outruns supply, prices rise, your bill grows, businesses pass on costs, groceries get more expensive, and inflation creeps in quietly. And this isn't theoretical, it's already happening. Across the US, residential electricity bills have climbed to the highest levels in over a decade as demand rises and utilities push through rate increases. Households are paying noticeably more per kilowatt hour than just a few years ago. In some places, the spikes are brutal. Washington, D.C. saw household bills jump more than 20% in 2025, with double-digit increases across states like Indiana, Illinois, and Tennessee. And that's before AI demand fully hits. Near major data center hubs, places like Northern Virginia, residents are already seeing 20% bill increases even while using less electricity at home. Utilities openly link this to infrastructure costs and the growing power draw from data centers. This matters because electricity isn't optional. You can cancel a streaming service. You can't cancel your power bill. You need electricity to cook, to heat, to cool your home, and to charge the EV you're told will save the planet. And here's the kicker. Electricity prices have been rising faster than inflation, in some cases 2 to 3 times faster than wages. That gap doesn't close on its own. And as a quick side note, it's not just data centers pushing demand. Electric vehicles, electrified homes, and industry are all drawing more power too. Everything is being electrified, which means households and factories will need more electricity tomorrow than they do today. All of that pulls from the same grid, while generation struggles to keep pace, and the result is predictable. Prices rise. This is the part of the AI energy story that doesn't get tweeted enough. Electricity doesn't scale like software. It doesn't scale like GPUs. It doesn't scale like chip fabs. It scales like infrastructure, slow to build, brutally expensive, land-hungry, over-regulated, and measured in years, not sprints. And that changes everything. Because when power becomes the bottleneck, AI scaling slows down, not because the models hit a wall, but because the electrons do. Training queues stretch, new data centers wait, expansion plans stall. And this isn't painless. It makes energy more expensive. It makes growth more bureaucratic. It makes everything slower. For companies, for governments, and for households quietly paying higher bills. Most importantly, it turns energy into a choke point, and choke points decide races. In a competition with China, that's not a footnote, it's a structural disadvantage. So let's summarize the American situation. The US didn't stumble into an AI energy problem. It built one. Data center demand is exploding. Power plants take a decade. And suddenly, the country that scaled software overnight is learning a hard lesson. Electricity doesn't scale like code. Permits drag, labor is scarce, costs run into the billions, timelines stretch past elections. At this point, someone always says, "Kai, SMRs will fix it." No, they won't. Not in time. Right now, SMRs are mostly hype, prototypes, and PowerPoint. Permits aren't done, supply chains aren't ready, and the timelines live in the 2030s if everything goes right. And even that ignores the bigger problem. Resources aren't infinite. Steel, copper, turbines, transformers, all tightening. Demand goes up, prices follow. Gas turbines already have longer wait times. Costs are rising before the real build-out even starts. So no, the AI dream isn't dead, but it is slowing down. Not because the models stopped improving, but because compute won't scale as fast as the hype assumed. And that changes everything. Whoever can scale power faster can scale AI faster. Next episode, we look at China. Same question, very different answer. Spoiler, when US policymakers actually look at China's energy build-out, the confidence drops fast. Because while Washington debates, China builds. While America argues about the future, China locks in megawatts. And that's when the mood shifts from optimism to panic. Next episode, China, energy, and why this comparison makes people nervous. That's it for today. If you enjoyed this episode, be kind and tap like or subscribe. Seriously, every click tells the algorithm that I deserve slightly more attention than conspiracy videos and raccoon compilations. I'm Kai. See you next time, you delightful little data points.